beneath the dust of forgotten epochs lies a question that refuses to sleep. What if the shape of humanity was not born solely from the blind march of evolution, but from the deliberate hand of something older, vaster, more calculating? In the strata of stone, in fragments of bone, and the sudden leaps of our ancient brain, there lingers the shadow of a design. Civilizations rose and fell, yet myths across continents whisper the same theme. Beings who descended from the sky, who gave knowledge, who shaped clay into thought. Sumer spoke of the Anunnaki, Egypt of gods who ruled before kings, Mesoamerica of feathered serpents teaching the ways of time. These are not the same voices, yet they hum in a similar frequency, as if echoing a memory that refuses to die. Modern science draws clear lines through fossils, genomes, and timelines, but cracks appear when the rhythm falters. The sudden expansion of the human neocortex, the unexplainable sophistication of the oldest sites, like Göbekli Tepe, built by hands still considered primitive, the absence of transitional stages in the places one would most expect to find them. Are these mere coincidences, or the fingerprints of an intelligence so ancient it slipped through the very net of history? Perhaps our beginning was not a single dawn, but an arrangement, like notes placed carefully upon a cosmic score. And perhaps the ones who arranged it still linger in silence, watching, waiting for us to remember. Welcome to ARCHAEON. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. It begins not with what is seen, but with what resists explanation. In the silence of deserts and beneath the weight of mountains, questions remain buried like dormant seeds, waiting for the right listener to awaken them. Human history, as written in textbooks, offers a neat progression, a slow unfolding from ape-like ancestors to the builders of empires. Yet, along this path, anomalies stand like broken statues in a mist, too deliberate to ignore, too elusive to explain. There is a sense that something outside the simple arc of chance might have intervened, nudging the fragile flame of humanity toward complexity it could not yet bear on its own. One of the most disquieting puzzles emerges from the very architecture of our brains. Roughly 2 million years ago, the genus Homo began to separate itself from its primate cousins. For countless ages, changes in cranial size had been incremental, barely noticeable across millennia. And then, without warning, the human brain began to swell at a pace evolution rarely tolerates. In less than 1 million years, the cranial capacity of Homo erectus expanded nearly twofold, culminating in the remarkable intricacies of Homo sapiens. The leap was not merely in size, but in structure, folds upon folds, connections within connections, as if intelligence itself were sculpted with an urgency. How could natural selection alone, blind and patient, have engineered such a sudden acceleration? Some biologists describe it as a quantum leap in cognition, a phrase that betrays both awe and unease. Was this the silent hand of environment and adaptation, or the trace of something else? The Sumerians, who called themselves the black-headed people, carried tales older than the sands of Mesopotamia. Their cuneiform tablets speak of beings who came from the heavens, the Anunnaki, who shaped mankind from clay and divine essence. To scholars, these myths are allegory, but to others, they sound suspiciously like memory. Is it a coincidence that the earliest known written civilization described the human origin not as an accident, but as a deliberate act of engineering? The clay figure, molded and animated by forces beyond, becomes a metaphor that blurs into the genetic code, as though myth carried a buried recollection of intervention. Archaeology, too, struggles with its riddles. Göbekli Tepe, in southeastern Turkey, stands as one of the oldest known monumental sites in the world, dated to around 11,600 years ago. Its massive pillars, carved with intricate animal figures, rise from a period when humans were presumed to be simple hunter-gatherers, untrained in the art of complex construction. Mainstream explanations argue that it was the symbolic heart of a nascent society. Yet the sophistication of its architecture defies the assumed technological capacity of its builders. No tools of such refinement have been found, no clear evolutionary staircase leading to such sudden grandeur. If knowledge came not from slow invention, could it have been bestowed? Could Göbekli Tepe be not the beginning of civilization, but the remnant of something remembered or even guided? The human genome itself bears mysteries. In 2003, the Human Genome Project mapped the code of life, revealing not only what we share with other creatures but what separates us. One feature stands out: chromosome 2, which appears to be the product of a fusion between two ancestral ape chromosomes. It is as though a seam exists in our very code, an edit stitched long ago. Evolutionary theory allows for such fusions, yet the timing and the outcome remain uncanny. Why did this fusion accompany the dawn of traits that defined humanity? Complex language, abstract thought, symbolic art. Geneticists debate whether it was pure accident or something far less random. The question lingers like a note that never fully resolves. Could the human blueprint itself be the legacy of an ancient intelligence? From the caves of Chauvet in France to the ochre-covered bones in Blombos Cave in South Africa, early art blooms with a suddenness that unsettles. 20, 30, 40,000 years ago, beings not unlike us painted, carved, imagined. Horses gallop across stone walls with anatomical precision. Spirals, dots, and abstract symbols appear that seem closer to language than decoration. Why did such expression emerge almost simultaneously across distant lands, as if ignited by a common spark? If evolution alone were the teacher, why this synchronicity? Was there a moment, unseen in fossil records, when the mind was lit like a torch by a hand that did not belong to nature? Yet to suggest that humanity was shaped, engineered, or guided is to trespass into dangerous ground. Scholars insist upon caution, arguing that the gaps in our knowledge are not proof of intervention, but simply of time. Fossils are rare. Tools are lost. DNA mutates under the slow hand of chance. The mainstream narrative holds firm. Homo sapiens rose by their own struggle, carving meaning from survival. To posit otherwise risks stepping into speculation that cannot be measured, into stories that drift too close to myth. And yet, it is precisely in myth that something stubborn endures. Across cultures, the story repeats with uncanny resemblance. In the Popol Vuh of the Maya, gods fashioned humans first from mud, then from wood, and finally from maize, until the right balance was found. In the Enuma Elish, humankind was created from the blood of a slain god to serve those who came before. In Egypt, Thoth is credited with the invention of language and writing, gifts without which civilization would crumble. Were these tales mere allegories for natural development, or coded memories of something far less earthly? If ancient cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, all whispered of creation not as accident but as craft, is it folly to dismiss them entirely? There is a tension that grows in the spaces between science and myth, between fossil and fable. It is in these cracks that speculation takes root. Could an intelligence have existed before us, not human, not bound to the same frailty of flesh? Perhaps terrestrial, perhaps from the stars, perhaps something we cannot yet imagine. The evidence is scattered, ambiguous, and yet hauntingly persistent. It lingers in the double helix, in the silent stones, in the echoes of old prayers. It doesn't scream, but whispers, waiting for ears willing to listen. The question that arises is less about proof than about possibility. If humanity was engineered, what was the purpose? To serve, to inherit, or simply to continue a pattern older than memory? And if there was a maker, what does it mean that we no longer see them? Did they abandon us? Or are they hidden, watching, veiled by the very myths we treat as fantasy? Every culture that remembers them also remembers their departure, as if a curtain fell and left us with fragments. Perhaps the true mystery is not that humanity might have been shaped, but why those shapers vanished. And so the story folds back into silence, leaving only questions that cannot yet be buried. Was the leap of the human mind an accident of evolution, or the echo of a hand that wrote us into being? If myths are memories, what is it that we are forgetting? As the night deepens and the old stars drift across the sky, the thought remains, soft and unrelenting. Perhaps the truest origin of humanity lies not in the bones we unearth, but in the shadows that refuse to let go. There is a moment when the familiar rhythm of history falters, when the straight line we are taught to follow bends into strange loops. If humanity was not only a child of nature, but also a creation refined by hands unseen, then the traces of such intervention would not rest solely in bones or genomes. They would surface in fragments of stone, in patterns carved across landscapes, in whispers carried through the oldest stories. To approach these remnants is to step into a field of tension where archaeology meets mythology, and where the line between knowledge and memory begins to blur. Consider the strange alignments of the world's most ancient monuments. Long before compasses, before mapped skies, early builders seemed to possess an uncanny awareness of celestial movements. At Nabta Playa, deep in the Egyptian desert, stone circles dated to nearly 7,000 years ago appear to have tracked solstices and star risings, centuries before Stonehenge rose from the British soil. Who taught these desert wanderers to align stone with the stars? Their craftsmanship suggests an intimacy with cosmic cycles far beyond what survival alone required. Some archaeologists argue that such knowledge could have emerged naturally, a careful observation born of countless generations under open skies. But others wonder, why would a culture on the edge of survival, preoccupied with water and herds, devote such precision to the heavens? Unless the sky itself had been a map given, a memory of teachers who once descended from it. The pattern repeats across the globe. In Mesoamerica, the ruins of Teotihuacan stretch in perfect symmetry, its main avenue aligned not with local terrain, but with celestial events. The layout resembles the Orion constellation, a pattern mirrored again at Giza, where the three great pyramids trace the same celestial belt. Mainstream historians explain these alignments as symbolic, the work of cultures whose mythologies tied heaven and earth. Yet the recurrence of Orion across continents separated by oceans suggests something deeper, a shared inheritance. Was this convergence born of coincidence, or of instruction whispered long before recorded time? If an older intelligence shaped the roots of humanity, perhaps it left markers in the very architecture of our beginnings. The myths of origin echo the same. The Dogon of Mali, for example, have long been cited for their knowledge of Sirius B, a dwarf star invisible to the naked eye. Their traditions describe visitors from the sky, the Nomo, who descended and imparted wisdom of the stars. Skeptics argue that such knowledge might have been introduced by European contact, though the stories themselves predate colonial presence. Whether fact or embellishment, the symbolism remains haunting. Another culture remembering not random invention, but the gift of knowledge from something beyond. If there was indeed a prehistoric superintelligence, it would not have needed to leave monuments or myths alone. It could have left itself in the very structure of language. Linguists have long debated the origins of human speech, a leap as enigmatic as the growth of the human brain. Language appeared not in fragments, but in fully formed complexity. Proto-languages reconstructed by scholars reveal striking similarities across distant families, echoes of a mother tongue that may never be recovered. In the myths of Sumer, the confusion of tongues at Babel was seen as divine punishment, a fragmentation of unity once held. What if, instead of punishment, it was a scattering, an intentional dispersion by those who had shaped us, ensuring that no single people held all memory of their origin? Each culture carried a fragment of the whole, like shards of a vessel shattered and scattered to prevent its reconstruction. And yet, in the face of these riddles, the guardians of orthodoxy insist upon caution. Archaeologists remind us that alignments can be coincidence, that oral traditions shift with time, that human beings are pattern seekers prone to weaving significance into accidents. Language, they argue, was not born suddenly, but evolved alongside the brain, shaped by survival and necessity. The Dogon's knowledge, they insist, can be explained through cultural contamination. Göbekli Tepe was not alien guidance, but the labor of a community whose symbolic imagination outpaced its tools. Each anomaly has its explanation, yet the accumulation of anomalies builds a weight that refuses dismissal. If every culture whispers the same pattern, if every continent hides the same alignments, how many coincidences can history endure before the silence itself becomes suspicious? Some scholars on the margins have dared to ask whether humanity's sudden ascension was not a natural crescendo, but a seeded experiment. Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of the DNA helix, once speculated on directed panspermia, the idea that life on Earth might have been planted deliberately by an advanced intelligence. Though his musings were dismissed as speculation, the thought carries resonance. If life itself could be seeded, why not intelligence shaped within it? The leap from stone to mind, from survival to imagination, could be not a random fire, but a spark struck by design. The conflict lies in interpretation. To embrace the mainstream view is to trust in patience, in the power of gradual accumulation. To entertain the alternative is to step into the abyss of questions without answers. Yet perhaps both paths lead to the same wonder, whether guided by nature's blind hand or by something far older. The story of humanity is steeped in mystery. What troubles the quiet hours is not whether we arose by chance, but whether the evidence of our shaping still surrounds us, misread as myth or buried as anomaly. The climax of this tension arises when the patterns cross disciplines. Archaeology finds alignments. Myth preserves visitors. Genetics hints at strange fusions. Language scatters into fragments. Each by itself can be explained away. Together, they form a web too intricate to ignore. It is as though the world itself is an archive, encoded not only in stone and story, but in the very code of life. If the prehistoric superintelligence existed, it was not careless. It left traces in ways that would resist decay, embedding itself into memory, into ritual, into the very rhythm of thought. Perhaps it knew that one day, in the long night of the species, humanity would turn back and wonder who had left the trail. And so the question returns, soft but unrelenting. If humans were engineered, who engineered the engineers? Was the prehistoric intelligence itself the last spark of a cycle older than history? Civilizations rise and fall, myths repeat, stars are watched and measured, as if existence itself is a pattern rehearsed again and again. The monuments, the myths, the code, all may be fragments of an older story, one whose authors remain hidden beyond the veil of memory. In the stillness of night, when the stars press close and the stones of forgotten temples seem to breathe, the thought lingers. What if humanity is not the first to walk this path, but merely the latest to inherit a design far older than time? The silence of the earth does not always keep its secrets. Sometimes, in the shifting of soil or the opening of caves, fragments appear that should not exist, relics out of place, moments that slip through the neat corridors of official history. These are the so-called anomalies, artifacts and remains whose presence seems almost designed to taunt the notion of a straight, unbroken timeline. They are dismissed, contested, or quietly ignored, yet they persist, haunting the edges of archaeological reports, whispered about in circles that refuse to forget. If humanity was engineered, perhaps these fragments are not mistakes in the record, but deliberate reminders, like hidden notes left in the margins of a manuscript. One such enigma lies in the form of anatomically modern human footprints discovered in layers of sediment far older than the accepted emergence of Homo sapiens. In Latoli, Tanzania, fossilized tracks more than 6 million years old show bipedal beings walking side by side, their gait eerily human. The official explanation attributes them to Australopithecus afarensis, a hominin ancestor, yet the stride and alignment remain unsettlingly close to modern proportions. Later reports of human-like footprints found in strata dated tens of millions of years older, such as those in Turkmenistan or even deeper strata in the Americas, are regarded as errors, misdatings, or outright fabrications. Still, the idea lingers. If humans were engineered, might the designers have left prototypes, earlier versions, experiments layered beneath the soil? Equally troubling are the discoveries of advanced metallurgy in contexts that should not allow them. In 1851, in Massachusetts, a bell-shaped metal vessel was blasted from solid rock estimated to be hundreds of millions of years old. In 1912, miners in Oklahoma reportedly found an iron pot embedded in coal seams of similar antiquity. Mainstream science rejects these accounts as misinterpretations or hoaxes, yet they echo a theme: the sense that fragments of technology appear where they do not belong, as though shadows of an intelligence had brushed against earlier ages. Whether genuine or mythologized, the stories illustrate a human instinct to sense interference, a suspicion that civilization is older than we dare to admit. The strangeness deepens when ancient maps are considered. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, shows parts of the world with uncanny accuracy: coastlines of South America, the exact placement of islands, even what appears to be the ice-free outline of Antarctica. Scholars argue that the map was compiled from older sources now lost. If so, who first charted these coasts? And how could they have known Antarctica's shores beneath ice that has cloaked them for thousands of years? Mainstream explanations suggest navigational error, the imagination of explorers, or natural guesswork. Yet if one dares to step outside the safety of orthodoxy, the map reads like a fragment of knowledge preserved from a civilization far older than ours, a people guided or engineered by a superintelligence that surveyed the planet before recorded history began. At the same time, ancient texts offer windows into impossible detail. The Vedas of India describe machines called vimanas, flying chariots powered by energies unknown. The Sumerian epics speak of kingship descending from the heavens, of rulers who lived for hundreds of years, as though longevity itself was once in the hands of those who shaped human destiny. In the Book of Enoch, angelic beings impart forbidden knowledge to mankind: metallurgy, astronomy, enchantments, the crafting of weapons. These stories, scattered across traditions, point toward an intrusion of knowledge sudden and immense, knowledge that seems less discovered than delivered. If humanity was meant to be a creation, perhaps these tales are the fractured record of its programming, encoded not only in DNA, but in memory passed as myth. And still, the voices of caution grow louder. Scientists point out that human perception is prone to illusion, that myths exaggerate, that artifacts can be misdated, that maps can be miscopied. The story of out-of-place artifacts is cluttered with frauds and mistakes, and to use them as evidence is to court unreliability. But the question that refuses to vanish is whether the sheer recurrence of anomalies points to something deeper. If even 1 out of 1,000 were authentic, it would be enough to destabilize the entire edifice of the orthodox timeline. A single true artifact would suggest that history is not linear, but fractured, punctuated by interventions we no longer recognize. The climax of these considerations is reached when one steps back to view the accumulation: footprints in ancient stone, tools in impossible strata, maps with uncanny precision, texts that speak of teachers from the heavens. Each one alone may be explained away, yet together they hum with the rhythm of a larger pattern. It is as though the prehistoric superintelligence left breadcrumbs scattered across eras, small enough to be doubted, persistent enough to remain. Like a signature written in code, these anomalies are reminders that the human story may not be our own invention. And so the lull of night settles upon these riddles. Perhaps the anomalies are not mistakes, not frauds, not coincidences, but intentional intrusions, messages for a species engineered to eventually awaken to its own mystery. The Earth, after all, has been rewritten countless times. Civilizations rise, vanish, and are buried beneath soil and sea. But the stones remember, the maps remember, the myths remember, and somewhere in the silence between geology and legend, a question lingers, patient and inexhaustible. Are these the fingerprints of a vanished intelligence, or only the shadows of our longing for a forgotten origin? The truth remains just beyond reach, like a voice that fades as soon as one leans closer, leaving behind only a hush that seems to whisper, "Look again, for the story is not what it seems." There are moments when silence becomes more eloquent than speech, when what is absent from the record speaks louder than what remains. Human history, so often told as a tale of survival and invention, is riddled with absences. Eras where progress should have left traces, yet left none. Civilizations that bloomed too suddenly and disappeared too completely. If humanity was engineered by a prehistoric intelligence, perhaps these gaps are not accidents of erosion or fire, but deliberate edits, as though someone has torn pages from the book before passing it down. In these lacunae, in what is missing, the faintest outline of design begins to show itself. One of the most persistent absences lies in the Paleolithic to Neolithic transition, the so-called agricultural revolution. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans hunted and gathered, leaving little evidence of large-scale social organization. Then, as if struck by a lightning bolt of realization, communities across the globe began to cultivate, settle, build. Agriculture appears in the Fertile Crescent, in China, in Mesoamerica, each region separated by oceans and thousands of years, yet all producing similar shifts in technology, ritual, and cosmology. Scholars describe this as parallel evolution, a response to similar pressures. Yet the question remains, why so sudden? Why so synchronized? The domestication of plants and animals, the leap into symbolic architecture, the emergence of priestly classes. These are not gradual murmurings, but abrupt eruptions. Could the spark of cultivation have been ignited by instruction, as though the engineers of our species returned to offer the next step? Sites like Jericho and Çatalhöyük, among the world's oldest known cities, complicate the narrative further. At Çatalhöyük, dating back over 9,000 years, wall paintings, shrines, and figurines suggest a symbolic and spiritual complexity far beyond what one expects from a village society. The people built their homes close together, entered through roof openings, and filled their walls with imagery of leopards, vultures, and deities. There is little evidence of warfare, but an overwhelming sense of ritual. Archaeologists debate whether this represents the dawn of religion or its continuation from something older. If humanity was guided, perhaps these cities were not the first experiments in urban life, but attempts to preserve fragments of an earlier blueprint. The missing chapters are not only cultural, but biological. Genetic studies have revealed another absence, one of lineage. Around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, Homo sapiens experienced what geneticists call a bottleneck. The diversity of our DNA shrank to a startling narrowness, as though most branches of humanity had been pruned away, leaving only a few survivors to seed the modern population. Explanations range from volcanic disaster to climatic shifts. Yet in the shadow of our larger question, another possibility arises. What if this was not a random catastrophe, but a deliberate reset? To refine the experiment, to redirect its course, to ensure the continuity of a specific design. The thought unsettles, for it implies not only that our existence may have been engineered, but that it may have been edited more than once. There are myths that speak eerily of such erasures. The Hindu Puranas tell of cycles of creation and destruction, yugas in which humanity rises, falls, and is renewed. In Mesoamerican lore, the gods fashioned 4 worlds before the current one, each destroyed by flood, fire, wind, or jaguars. The biblical flood, too, speaks of a cleansing, a reset meant to purge corruption and begin again. Could these myths be echoes of genetic bottlenecks, memories of interventions when the human experiment was recalibrated? To the faithful, they are tales of divine wrath. To the skeptical, they are allegories of natural disaster. But to those who sense the hand of prehistoric intelligence, they sound like records of programmed renewal. And yet, in the halls of scholarship, caution prevails. Archaeologists insist that the Neolithic transition was the product of climate stabilization after the Ice Age, that agriculture was inevitable once populations grew. Geneticists warn that bottlenecks are common in species histories, and that survival always carves narrow paths through time. Historians remind us that myth transforms memory into metaphor. The consensus resists the intrusion of any outside hand. Still, beneath the surface of these explanations lies the nagging question: why do the same patterns of emergence and destruction echo across every corner of the globe? Why do so many traditions remember not only beginnings, but re-beginnings? The crescendo of this paradox is reached when one examines the sudden collapses that follow just as suddenly as the rises. The Indus Valley civilization, vast and orderly, with sophisticated drainage and urban planning, disappears without clear cause. The Olmec, whose colossal heads and intricate art hint at a society of complexity, vanish into obscurity. The builders of Pumapunku in the Andes leave behind stones so finely cut that even modern tools struggle to replicate them, yet their culture disintegrates into silence. These are not the long, slow decays of entropy, but abrupt vanishings, as though chapters deliberately closed. Was this the work of drought, war, and disease, or the quiet hand of those who once edited the species itself? If we imagine humanity as a story written not only by time, but by design, then the missing chapters are as telling as the written ones. Perhaps the engineers, whoever they were, allowed us to flourish, then withdrew, then returned again to erase and refine. Each silence becomes suspicious. Each absence feels intentional. To see history this way is to view it not as a climb, but as a series of experiments, beginnings, endings, recalibrations. The stones, the genes, the myths. They are fragments of drafts rewritten again and again. And so the night presses in with its old, unyielding question. What if humanity is not the author of its own survival, but the subject of an ongoing manuscript we have only begun to decipher? If we were engineered, what does it mean that the book of our existence carries so many torn pages? Did our makers lose interest? Or are they still near, preparing to write the next chapter? In the silence left by vanished cities and forgotten lineages, there lingers a whisper that refuses to die. Perhaps what is missing was never truly lost, but concealed, waiting for the day when we learn to read absence as fluently as presence. There are times when the earth itself seems to rise against forgetfulness, when stones shift and ruins emerge to remind us that our story may not be ours alone. The surface of our planet is a restless veil, hiding and revealing in cycles, like a stage curtain lifted only for a moment before descending again. Beneath this veil lie monuments so vast and enigmatic that they feel less like the work of fragile hands and more like the residue of instructions followed long ago. If humans were engineered by a prehistoric intelligence, then perhaps these structures are not simply triumphs of human ingenuity, but the echoes of knowledge given rather than discovered. The Great Pyramid of Giza has long been the axis of this enigma. Rising from the desert with impossible precision, it aligns almost perfectly to true north, its sides proportioned in ways that seem to embed mathematical constants like pi and phi. Blocks weighing multiple tons were cut and placed with such accuracy that even a modern razor blade cannot slip between them. Egyptologists assure us that these marvels can be explained through ingenious planning, coordinated labor, and centuries of experimentation. Yet the pyramid appears fully formed, without a clear lineage of failed attempts behind it, as though its builders inherited knowledge rather than stumble upon it. If it was a tomb, why so little evidence of burial? If it was a monument, why so exact, so coded with numbers that resonate with celestial cycles? Some have argued that the pyramid functions more as a machine than a mausoleum, a structure tuned to the earth itself. The possibility lingers that what we see is not merely stone, but instruction materialized. Across the ocean, the megaliths of South America tell a similar story. At Sacsayhuaman, immense stones interlock with such precision that no mortar is required, their edges fitting together like pieces of a giant puzzle. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons, transported across rugged terrain that still defies explanation. The ruins of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku display cuts so exact, angles so sharp, that modern engineers admit difficulty in replicating them without advanced tools. Archaeologists attribute these achievements to determination, experimentation, and lost techniques of stone shaping. But what if those techniques were not lost because they were never invented by humans in the first place? What if they were fragments of a knowledge passed down, pieces of a manual from a guiding hand? The alignments do not end with stone. They extend outward, linking earth to sky. The Nazca lines, vast geoglyphs stretching across the Peruvian desert, depict animals, spirals, and straight lines that run for kilometers. Visible only from above, their purpose remains uncertain. Some see ritual pathways, others astronomical calendars, but the sheer scale provokes unease. Why create images too immense for human eyes to behold? Unless, perhaps, they were messages or markers intended for someone who could see from the heavens. If humans were guided, then these figures may have been not art, but communication, a language between the engineered and the engineers. In Asia, the mystery deepens with the city of Nanmadol, built upon coral reefs in Micronesia. Its basalt columns, stacked into artificial islands, give the impression of an abandoned blueprint. The purpose of the city remains obscure, and its construction, involving massive stones transported over water, seems out of proportion to the society that built it. Legends call it the work of sorcerers who levitated the stones. Such stories are dismissed as myth, yet they echo across cultures, in the biblical account of the Tower of Babel, in Celtic tales of giants, in Polynesian chants of gods who moved mountains. Was this simply metaphor, or memory of technologies forgotten because they were never truly ours? The defenders of orthodoxy argue that mystery dissolves under patient scrutiny. The pyramids were tombs shaped by the logic of ritual and mathematics. The Andean stones were the result of ingenious quarrying and centuries of labor. The Nazca lines were ceremonial offerings to gods, seen not from the sky, but by those who walked them in devotion. Nan Madol was the product of communal effort, the outcome of generations refining techniques unknown to us today. To suggest otherwise, they warn, diminishes human creativity, reducing our ancestors to mere recipients of alien instruction. And yet, the weight of stone, the scale of effort, the recurrence of celestial alignment all combine into a pattern that feels less like coincidence than choreography. The climax of this tension is felt most strongly in the way these monuments seem to speak to one another across time and space. The pyramids of Egypt mirror Orion's belt, just as the layout of Teotihuacan does in Mexico. The Nazca lines, like Stonehenge, align with solstices. Sites separated by oceans and millennia hum with the same obsession. The stars, the cycles, the unseen order of the cosmos. If humans were engineered, then perhaps these monuments were part of the calibration, markers and instruments designed to anchor us to a larger rhythm, reminders of a bond we have since forgotten. Each stone, each alignment, each carving is a syllable in a language older than any scripture, a language spoken not with words, but with mass and shadow. What then of the engineers themselves? If they gave us the ability to build, to calculate, to dream in stone, where did they go? Myths speak of their departure, the gods retreating to the heavens, the teachers vanishing into the sea, the giants destroyed in cataclysm. The monuments remain as relics, silent but enduring, as though their creators expected that one day we would return to them in wonder. Perhaps these structures were never meant to be understood fully in their own time, but to endure as puzzles, clues left for a species that was not yet ready to remember its true story. And so the stones rest beneath the slow passage of stars, patient in their silence. They do not answer, but they insist. They draw us back again and again, compelling us to measure, to speculate, to doubt. Perhaps that is their purpose, not to reveal, but to provoke, to awaken a memory we carry like an echo. The pyramids, the megaliths, the geoglyphs, the drowned cities, they are more than ruins. They are mirrors, showing us a reflection we are not yet willing to see. And as the night deepens, a question rises from their silence, soft and unrelenting. Are these monuments proof of our greatness, or the reminders of a guidance we have forgotten, left for us like markers on a path that stretches far beyond history? Beneath the surface of memory runs a deeper current, one that speaks not only through monuments and myths, but through cataclysm itself. Civilizations rise and fall, but sometimes they fall all at once, as though a hidden hand swept across the earth to clear the slate. These moments of sudden ruin are written into both geology and legend, their scars visible in the land and their echoes preserved in sacred texts. If humanity was engineered, could these great destructions have been deliberate resets, moments when the experiment was interrupted, recalibrated, or nearly erased? The Younger Dryas, around 12,900 years ago, is one such moment. The planet had been warming after the last ice age, but suddenly temperatures plummeted again for over 1,000 years. Glaciers advanced, ecosystems collapsed, megafauna disappeared. The cause remains debated. Volcanic eruptions, shifts in ocean currents, or, as some propose, the impact of a fragmented comet striking the Earth. Supporters of the so-called Younger Dryas impact hypothesis point to layers of nanodiamonds, microspherules, and other unusual markers in sediments across multiple continents. Whether impact or mystery, the event was catastrophic and curiously close to the period when Göbekli Tepe was founded, as if civilization's first great leap rose in the shadow of near destruction. Was the site a response, a survival mechanism, or a deliberate act of preservation after a cosmic blow that nearly reset humanity's path? Across cultures, myths recall floods that wiped clean the earth. The Sumerians told of Ziusudra, who survived a divine deluge. The Bible echoes the tale with Noah, chosen to preserve life when God decided to begin again. The Greeks remembered Deucalion and Pyrrha, who cast stones over their shoulders to repopulate the world. In Mesoamerica, floods ended previous creations, leaving only fragments for the gods to try anew. The resonance is uncanny. Separated by continents and millennia, cultures recall not just disaster, but intentional cleansing, as though destruction was not accident, but decree. If humans were engineered, might these stories be fragmented recollections of planned resets, times when the makers wiped away what had gone astray? The oceans hide similar mysteries. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka and the Gulf of Kambhat, submerged ruins suggest cities lost beneath the waves, their stone blocks and structures lying in silence beneath silt. In Japan, off Yonaguni, massive undersea terraces and steps appear carved, though debate rages as to whether they are natural or artificial. The timing of many such submerged sites aligns with the end of the last ice age, when rising seas swallowed coastlines where early settlements may have thrived. Mainstream archaeology explains these ruins as natural formations or exaggerated interpretations. But if even a fraction of them are genuine, they point to advanced societies erased by floods, remembered only in myth. And if humanity was engineered, perhaps these drownings were not merely natural disasters, but chosen purges, corrections of a design. The Andes, too, tell a tale of sudden ruin. At sites like Tiahuanaco, myths describe how gods destroyed earlier peoples with a flood of fire and water. In Mesopotamia, Eridu was said to be rebuilt again and again after catastrophe. The pattern persists, cycles of creation and destruction, as if humanity's history was a series of drafts, each erased when the ink smudged. Scientists resist such interpretations, pointing to natural processes, climate change, tectonic shifts, volcanic eruptions. Yet the scale and recurrence of these disasters, always linked to the emergence or collapse of civilizations, stirs unease. Could the disasters themselves have been instruments in the shaping of humanity, chisels wielded by hands unseen? There is also the enigma of knowledge lost. Ancient texts describe sciences and technologies destroyed in flames or drowned in floods. The burning of the Library of Alexandria is remembered as a tragedy, yet myths speak of even older archives, Atlantean records, Mayan codices, Sumerian tablets that vanished without explanation. If humanity was guided, why allow knowledge to be lost so completely? Unless, perhaps, the erasure was intentional, ensuring that certain truths remained hidden until another age. What if the resets were not only biological and cultural, but intellectual, designed to control the pace of discovery, to prevent us from leaping ahead too far, too quickly? The guardians of official history urge restraint. They remind us that floods are common in river valleys, that oral traditions magnify disaster into cosmic drama, that submerged ruins often prove to be natural formations. The Younger Dryas, they argue, was a climatic fluctuation, catastrophic but unintentional. The myths, they say, are allegories for survival, not records of programming. To interpret them otherwise risks descending into speculation. Yet the unease remains. How is it that the same story of near annihilation appears everywhere? How is it that humanity remembers not only survival, but deliberate renewal? At the height of this tension lies the possibility that cataclysms were not interruptions, but instructions. Each reset did not end humanity, but redirected it. After the Younger Dryas, agriculture blossomed. After floods, new dynasties rose, new knowledge spread. Perhaps destruction was part of the design, a way of sculpting the species through fire and water. It is a thought both terrifying and awe-inspiring that we are not merely survivors of chance, but participants in a long, deliberate shaping, our pain and loss woven into a larger pattern. And so, the night closes in with its quiet burden. If the Earth's great disasters were not accidents, but interventions, what does that say about those who engineered us? Were they guardians, pruning what grew too wild? Were they experimenters, resetting until the outcome suited them? Or were they indifferent, letting cycles of creation and destruction unfold according to rules we cannot yet grasp? The silence of the ruins, the weight of the flood myths, the scars in stone and sediment, they do not answer. They only invite the question to linger as the stars wheel slowly overhead. Are we the fragile product of chance, or the survivors of deliberate resets in a story still being written by hands unseen? There is a quality to sound that transcends matter, a resonance that seems to belong as much to the unseen as to the tangible. If humanity was engineered, perhaps one of the most subtle yet enduring traces of that design lies not in stone or blood, but in vibration. Across the world, in caves, temples, and monuments, the ancient builders appear to have understood something about frequency, tone, and resonance that science is only beginning to rediscover. Could sound itself have been a key, a tool given to early humans, or a clue left behind by the prehistoric intelligence that shaped us? Consider the hypogum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, a subterranean complex carved more than 5,000 years ago. Within its oracle chamber, sound resonates at a frequency of around 110 Hz, a tone that seems to affect the human brain, inducing altered states of consciousness. Experiments conducted there reveal that voices within the chamber carry with eerie amplification, vibrating through the stone in a way that feels both physical and transcendent. Was this a coincidence of architecture, or did its builders understand something profound about sound and its effect on human perception? Mainstream archaeology explains such features as acoustical accidents, but the precision suggests otherwise. A chamber deliberately tuned, like an instrument crafted to reach the human mind. This phenomenon is not isolated. At Chavin de Huántar in Peru, a temple complex more than 3,000 years old, narrow passageways and ducts channeled the sound of conch shells, producing a roar that reverberated through the stone, overwhelming those who entered. At Newgrange in Ireland, the passage tomb aligns with the winter solstice, but it also produces deep resonance when sound is made within its chamber, amplifying chants into something otherworldly. Even Stonehenge has been shown to create unique acoustic effects, magnifying voices and music in ways that transform space into theater. These places were not only built for ritual, they were tuned. And if they were tuned, one must ask, to what purpose? Sound affects the brain, the body, even DNA itself. Modern studies show that vibration can influence cellular structures, that certain frequencies can heal or harm. Did ancient builders know this? Were their temples designed not merely as houses for gods, but as machines for altering consciousness, for opening doors within the human mind? If humans were engineered, perhaps the engineers left us with a resonance key, hidden in architecture and ritual, a tool that allowed us to connect with them, or with states of being beyond ordinary perception. Myth supports this unsettling possibility. In Hindu tradition, the universe itself is said to have begun with a sound, Om, the primordial vibration. In the Gospel of John, creation begins not with light, but with the Word. Egyptian priests spoke of Thoth using words of power to shape reality. And in the Norse Edda, Odin wields runes as chants that bend the world. Across cultures, sound is remembered not as symbol, but as force, something capable of creation, transformation, and control. If humanity was shaped, perhaps language and music were not inventions, but gifts, programmed into us as tools for unlocking potential. And yet, skepticism insists upon restraint. Acoustical phenomena, archaeologists argue, can be explained by the natural properties of stone and architecture. Ancient peoples may have valued resonance for ritual, but that does not imply advanced knowledge. Myths, they remind us, exaggerate the power of song and chant, transforming symbolic practices into tales of cosmic significance. Science warns against overextending. Frequency may influence biology, but the leap from acoustics to engineering by prehistoric intelligence is vast. Still, the persistence of these patterns across cultures remains difficult to dismiss. Why did so many ancient sites double as instruments? Why did so many traditions recall sound as the foundation of existence? The crescendo of this mystery emerges when one considers the link between sound and memory. Oral traditions carried knowledge long before writing, encoded in rhythm and chant. Certain patterns of sound embed themselves in the brain more deeply than prose, surviving across centuries. Could this have been intentional? A safeguard ensuring that fragments of the engineer's instructions would endure even when writing was lost? Chants, hymns, mantras. Perhaps they are more than devotion. Perhaps they are encrypted messages, frequencies designed to resonate with something in our biology, awakening a response we no longer recognize. Modern science, too, has stumbled into resonance's uncanny potential. Cymatics reveals how sound waves create patterns in sand, water, and matter, shapes that echo the motifs carved into ancient temples. Brainwave studies show that tones at specific frequencies can induce calm, heighten focus, or provoke visions. Ultrasound manipulates tissue. Vibration can levitate particles. Technologies that seem futuristic echo practices remembered in the oldest myths. If humans were engineered, maybe these discoveries are not new at all, but rediscoveries of a knowledge embedded in us, waiting to be unlocked. The question, then, is unsettling. Were ancient rituals of sound merely superstition? Or were they attempts to use a forgotten tool? If the engineers of humanity gave us resonance as a key, perhaps it was meant to connect us to them, or to dimensions we cannot yet perceive. The possibility arises that the great monuments were not only markers of presence, but instruments of communication, designed to vibrate in harmony with forces beyond. In this light, the chants of priests, the horns of shamans, the hymns of temples take on new weight, echoes of an ancient dialogue between humanity and its shapers, and yet silence remains their answer. The chambers still vibrate, the stones still sing, but no clear voice emerges. If there was once a dialogue, it has faded into echo. Perhaps the engineers left, or perhaps the key has been forgotten. The ruins hum with potential, but the melody they once carried is broken. What remains is longing, a sense that resonance itself holds secrets just beyond reach, waiting for ears capable of hearing. As the night deepens, the thought lingers like a low vibration through the air. What if sound was the first and most enduring gift of our makers, a language inscribed not on clay or papyrus, but in the very physics of existence? If so, then every chant, every echo in stone, every whispered hymn is not just devotion, but remembrance. And in that remembrance lies a question too profound to silence. Are we listening to the voices of our ancestors, or to the faint, enduring resonance of those who made us? There are mysteries that do not rest in stone or sky, but in the very code of life, where each strand of DNA reads like a manuscript written in a language we have only just begun to decipher. If humanity was engineered by a prehistoric intelligence, then perhaps the deepest evidence of such intervention lies not in myths or monuments, but in the sequences hidden within us, an archive so intricate that even today, with all our science, we struggle to comprehend its origin. The genome is both map and riddle, a spiral staircase rising into the unknown, and every step taken upon it leads back to the same haunting question. Was this pattern the product of chance or of design? The human genome contains roughly 3 billion base pairs, yet among these, vast stretches remain enigmatic, once dismissed as junk DNA, now increasingly suspected of carrying regulatory functions we do not yet understand. Why would evolution preserve such abundance of material if it were truly useless? Could these regions be encrypted instructions, dormant layers of a code whose meaning has not yet been unlocked? Some geneticists have suggested that the sheer complexity of non-coding DNA challenges the simplicity of natural selection. Others see in it the possibility of information waiting for triggers, as if written with a foresight beyond what nature alone might permit. One of the most striking anomalies lies in chromosome 2, the fusion of 2 ancestral ape chromosomes into one. This event, unique to humans, is seen as pivotal in shaping who we are, yet it appears as a seam stitched with uncanny precision. Telomere sequences, which normally cap chromosome ends, appear at its center, while vestigial centromere material lies within. Such a fusion is not impossible in nature, but its timing is extraordinary, coinciding with the emergence of traits that define humanity: complex language, symbolic thought, abstract reasoning. Was this a coincidence or an edit? Was humanity's leap forward encoded through intervention, a deliberate act of rewriting? There are other whispers in the code. Geneticists studying ancient DNA have discovered evidence of interbreeding with Neanderthals and Denisovans, archaic cousins whose legacy lives on in fragments of our genome. But alongside these traces lurk sequences that do not neatly fit, genetic signatures with no clear ancestral source. Some argue they may belong to hominins not yet discovered, buried deep in time. Others speculate they are remnants of something else, something that does not fit the tree at all. If humans were engineered, perhaps these fragments are scars of experimentation, pieces of versions that never survived, or signatures left by the makers themselves, woven into us as reminders. The myths seem to remember something of this. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki create humans by mingling their own essence with clay. In Genesis, humanity is made in the image of the divine. In many traditions, the gift of blood, spirit, or breath defines the origin of humankind, as though creation required not only matter, but the infusion of something higher. Could these myths be cultural echoes of genetic intervention, metaphors for the splicing of code? Ancient scribes could not have described DNA, but they may have preserved memory of what was done. The shaping of one form into another, the insertion of a spark that turned animal into mind. Skeptics argue that such readings are fantasies imposed upon data. Chromosomal fusion, they explain, is a natural occurrence observed in other species. Non-coding DNA is slowly revealing its functions through research without need for speculation. The presence of mysterious sequences can be attributed to gaps in sampling, to hominins yet unearthed, not to intervention. Science insists upon patience, upon resisting the temptation to fill gaps with mythology. Yet for every explanation, another anomaly arises, and the question persists. If evolution is blind, why does it so often appear purposeful? If chance is the author, why do the words in our genome feel like they follow a grammar we are only beginning to perceive? The climax of this puzzle emerges in the concept of panspermia, the idea that life itself did not originate on Earth, but was seeded from beyond. The theory, once fringe, has gained traction in scientific circles, not as fantasy, but as possibility. Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA's double helix, speculated on directed panspermia, the deliberate planting of life by an advanced intelligence. If life was seeded, then why not also shaped? Perhaps the genome carries not only the imprint of earthly evolution, but the fingerprints of its gardeners, a code written to unfold in stages, activated by the slow unfolding of time. Perhaps humanity itself is not a beginning, but a continuation, a node in a chain of genetic engineering that stretches beyond the Earth. What unsettles most is the possibility that our very urge to seek answers may itself be part of the code. Curiosity, imagination, the restless need to know. These are not mere byproducts of survival. They drive us beyond what is necessary, pushing us into realms of abstraction, philosophy, science. Could this hunger for truth have been programmed, a failsafe ensuring that one day we would begin to question our own origins? If so, then the genome is not only our blueprint, but our summons, calling us slowly, generation by generation, toward remembrance. And yet, the silence remains. DNA yields data, not answers. The sequences unravel. But the intention, if there was one, remains hidden. Some researchers dream of a message embedded in the code, a sequence too deliberate to be natural, waiting for us to read it. Others dismiss such hope as illusion, the human tendency to see order where none exists. But as our knowledge grows, the line between natural and designed blurs. Evolution itself may be a tool, a mechanism employed by intelligence to guide life into form. The distinction dissolves, leaving only the haunting sense that we are participants in a script older and stranger than history. And so, in the quiet of night, the thought circles back upon itself. Perhaps we are more than descendants of apes, more than survivors of chance. Perhaps we are a message written in flesh, encoded by hands unseen, unfolding slowly across millennia. The genome is not silent. It hums with patterns, repetitions, and mysteries still unread. If humanity was engineered, then our very bodies are archives, living scrolls that carry the memory of our making. The question remains like a heartbeat beneath the skin. Who wrote this code, and why does it lead us always toward the stars? There are threads in the tapestry of human memory that resist the scissors of time. They appear as myths, as fragments of forbidden knowledge, as stories so persistent that their repetition across cultures cannot be ignored. If humanity was engineered, perhaps not all traces of that act were erased. Perhaps fragments of the blueprint survive in legends of gods who walked among mortals, in tablets that speak of secrets withheld, in prophecies that hint at knowledge not meant for the present age. These echoes, scattered like broken glass across history, shimmer with a strange light. Too mythical to be accepted, too consistent to be dismissed. The Sumerian tablets, among the earliest known writings, describe the Anunnaki not as distant deities, but as rulers, teachers, and architects of humanity. Their kingship descended from heaven, and with it came order, agriculture, writing, and law. According to the myths, humans were fashioned to serve the gods, but eventually became companions, inheritors of their knowledge. Skeptics dismiss these accounts as symbolic, reflections of the human need to explain authority and hierarchy. Yet their detail remains unsettling. Lists of kings who reigned for thousands of years, precise genealogies of beings neither fully divine nor fully human. Could these be distorted memories of an intervention, records of the ones who engineered humanity and then withdrew? Other traditions preserve similar threads. In Egypt, the gods were said to have ruled before the first dynasties, passing down wisdom to the pharaohs. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was remembered as a teacher who brought knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, and timekeeping, only to vanish with the promise of return. In the Book of Enoch, angelic beings called the Watchers descended to earth, teaching humanity the secrets of metallurgy, enchantment, and the movements of the stars, knowledge both dangerous and transformative. The myths agree on a pattern: beings who came from beyond, who mingled with humanity, who imparted skills too advanced for their time, and who eventually disappeared. What if these stories are not allegories, but fragments of suppressed memory, encoded into myth because the truth was too immense to preserve otherwise? Archaeological discoveries occasionally brush against this possibility. The Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden in the caves of Qumran, contain apocryphal accounts of angels and visions that echo the Book of Enoch. The Nag Hammadi texts in Egypt preserve Gnostic gospels that speak of archons, shaping powers that molded humanity and bound it in ignorance. These writings, declared heretical, were buried or destroyed, as though someone wished to erase alternative versions of human origins. Was it coincidence that so many of these texts speak of intervention, of a humanity guided and restrained? Or were these suppressed precisely because they whispered too close to a truth better forgotten? The guardians of orthodoxy insist on restraint. Myths, they argue, are cultural metaphors. Long lifespans in Sumerian king lists are exaggerations, not records. The Watchers of Enoch are moral tales about hubris, not literal beings. Gnostic archons are metaphors for oppressive rulers, not cosmic engineers. Archaeologists, theologians, and historians all warn against conflating myth with memory. Yet, in the quiet spaces between texts, a pattern refuses to fade. If so many cultures independently recalled beings who shaped humanity, why do their stories align with such consistency? Could the myths be distorted reflections of a single event, like scattered mirrors reflecting the same light? The climax of this tension appears in the persistent motif of knowledge forbidden. Again and again, myths tell of truths given to humanity, but later suppressed. In Genesis, the fruit of knowledge is forbidden by the Creator, a boundary crossed that leads to exile. In the myths of Prometheus, fire is stolen from the gods and given to mortals, bringing both progress and punishment. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers teach secrets that corrupt as much as they enlighten. These tales suggest that humanity was not only created but controlled, its growth limited, its knowledge doled out in fragments. If humans were engineered, perhaps their makers feared their potential, allowing only measured access to the tools of power. Forbidden knowledge is not merely temptation, it is memory of restriction. Even in philosophy, the echoes continue. Plato's account of Atlantis is not only a story of a drowned world, but of a civilization punished for overreaching. In the Hermetic writings, knowledge is said to descend from the divine, hidden in symbols, accessible only to the initiated. Alchemy, mysticism, and esoteric traditions across centuries have whispered of a truth concealed from the masses, a truth about the origin of life and the shaping of humanity. To those who sought, fragments of this truth were preserved in veiled language, like keys hidden in riddles. Could this be the faint survival of the engineer's blueprint, encoded in ways that ensured only the persistent and the careful would find it? And yet, what is most haunting is not what is told, but what is missing. Whole libraries vanished, the scrolls of Alexandria, the codices burned by conquistadors, the oral traditions extinguished by conquest and silence. Why does humanity so often erase its own memory? Is it only the violence of empire and accident, or is it part of a deeper pattern, an intentional forgetting woven into our history? If knowledge of our origin was once more widespread, perhaps its erasure was itself an act of control, ensuring we would not remember too soon who we are or who shaped us. The silence of these erasures carries its own weight. For every fragment that survives, 1,000 more may be lost. Yet those that remain share a resonance, as though each is a shard of a larger truth shattered long ago. The Anunnaki, the Watchers, the feathered serpents, the ancient rulers before kings, they may be names for the same memory, seen through different eyes, told in different tongues. If humanity was engineered, then perhaps our deepest myths are not fantasies at all, but encrypted history, veiled in symbol so it could endure the long night of forgetting. As the night deepens, the thought lingers like a flame behind the eyes. What if the stories we call myth are not inventions, but the scattered memory of a prehistoric intelligence that walked among us? What if every tale of forbidden knowledge, every fragment of lost text, every vanished library is a reminder that the truth has always been near, yet always withheld? The silence of missing pages, the persistence of whispered names, the echoes of gods who shaped clay into mind, they form a pattern too fragile to grasp, yet too insistent to ignore. And so the question hovers, unresolved. like a shadow just beyond the firelight. Are these myths the dreams of our ancestors, or the faint recollections of a truth written into us by hands we no longer see? There are moments in history when the human story appears to surge forward with inexplicable force, as though some hidden accelerator were pressed, propelling us into transformations that seem too sudden for the quiet pace of evolution. These leaps, bursts of innovation, of knowledge, of cultural flowering, do not follow a simple line of progress. Instead, they appear like lightning across the dark, illuminating centuries in an instant before fading again. If humanity was engineered, perhaps these leaps are not accidents of inspiration, but interventions, carefully timed injections of knowledge meant to shape the trajectory of the species. One of the most striking examples is the sudden brilliance of ancient Sumer. Without apparent precedent, around the 4th millennium BCE, cities emerged from the Mesopotamian plain, equipped with advanced irrigation, monumental architecture, codified law, and written language. The Sumerians charted the stars, tracked time, and devised mathematics of startling sophistication. Archaeologists marvel at this sudden emergence, often calling Sumer the cradle of civilization. Yet the question remains, why here, why then, and why so suddenly? The Sumerian texts themselves claim kingship descended from heaven, that their wisdom was not invented but bestowed. Mainstream scholarship attributes their innovations to environmental necessity and social complexity. But to those who sense a guiding hand, Sumer looks less like a cradle than a reboot, an accelerated leap that suggests instruction rather than discovery. The same pattern appears in ancient Egypt. The Old Kingdom emerges with staggering achievements: the pyramids, hieroglyphic writing, complex religious cosmologies. It does not evolve slowly, but arrives fully formed, as though an entire world view were planted in the Nile Valley at once. The Egyptians themselves traced their lineage to gods who ruled before the first dynasties, divine beings who handed down the arts of writing, measurement, and healing. In their myth, Thoth, the god of wisdom, invents language and mathematics. Was this merely symbolic or a cultural echo of intervention? If humans were engineered, perhaps these sudden bursts of order were programmed upgrades, moments when new tools were inserted into the species' memory. In the Indus Valley, another enigma emerges. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, dating back more than 4,000 years, display urban planning so advanced that modern engineers still pause at their symmetry. Grid-patterned streets, sewage systems, standardized weights and measures. Yet the civilization fades into silence, leaving behind no kings, no great monuments, no clear origin or end. Scholars explain their sophistication as the result of steady development along trade routes, but others wonder, how does such coherence emerge without visible predecessors? And how does it vanish so completely? If humanity's path has been shaped, perhaps the Indus cities were another experiment, a sudden flowering guided by knowledge that arrived from elsewhere. Later, the pattern repeats. The sudden Greek miracle, when philosophy, mathematics, and science seem to awaken in a single generation. The Mayan mastery of astronomy, their calendars more precise than those of later European astronomers. The Olmecs, carving colossal heads with techniques and scale far beyond what is expected of a formative culture. Each of these bursts appears not as gradual accumulation, but as ignition, as though humanity's mind were set aflame at chosen intervals. Were these true revolutions of thought, or were they catalysts triggered from beyond, the fingerprints of engineers ensuring their creation did not stall? Science urges caution. Civilizations do not rise in vacuums, scholars remind us, but build upon the unseen work of countless generations. The appearance of sudden leaps, they argue, reflects the patchy survival of evidence. When the ground is excavated more fully, continuity often appears. Yet this explanation does not dissolve the mystery entirely. Why do cultures across the globe describe their knowledge as a gift from gods, sky beings, or teachers who appeared suddenly? Why do they insist that their own achievements were not theirs alone, but inheritances? The climax of this tension is reached when one considers the possibility of knowledge seeding, the idea that humanity's path was guided through carefully timed interventions, like steps in a long experiment. Each leap, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, the Mayans, Greece, might represent not random brilliance, but intentional releases of information designed to propel us forward. Perhaps the engineers left, but they did not abandon us entirely. Perhaps they nudged us from afar, ensuring that at key moments the necessary spark would appear, disguised as inspiration, myth, or revelation. If so, then what we call genius may sometimes be the echo of another mind working through us, planting seeds of knowledge in soil prepared to receive them. The question that lingers is what this pattern implies about our present age. If humanity has always been guided in leaps, are we now living in another such moment? The explosion of technology in the last 2 centuries, the Industrial Revolution, electricity, digital computation, space travel, unfolds with a speed unmatched in earlier ages. Some scientists see this as the natural acceleration of cumulative knowledge, but others feel the uncanny, that we are once again moving too quickly, as though another upgrade has been triggered. If humanity was engineered, then perhaps we are now approaching the next stage, one that may reveal more of the original blueprint. And yet, the silence remains. No teachers walk openly among us, no gods stride across the earth to hand down tablets of wisdom. If there are engineers, they work invisibly, or they have long since gone. What remains are fragments, myths of gods who gave and withdrew, monuments that encode knowledge we cannot fully read, bursts of genius that appear as if from nowhere. The tapestry of history glows with these moments, yet the thread that binds them is hidden. To see them as accidents is to rest in comfort. To see them as interventions is to face the possibility that we are not the masters of our own story. As the night deepens, the question sharpens like a blade drawn across silence. What if the leaps of civilization were never ours alone? What if every burst of brilliance, every sudden rise, every inexplicable advance was the echo of hands unseen, adjusting, correcting, ensuring we never strayed too far from a path we cannot yet perceive? The thought lingers, unsettling yet strangely luminous. Perhaps we are not only children of Earth, but apprentices of a hidden intelligence, following a script that stretches beyond the boundaries of history and into a future we have yet to comprehend. The story of humanity, when traced through its fractures and silences, seems less like a continuous line and more like a palimpsest. Eras written over, erased, and written again, leaving behind faint impressions of what once was. If we have been engineered, then perhaps the most haunting evidence of this design is not in what has been revealed, but in what has been hidden. the persistent veil, the barriers to memory, the sense that knowledge is always just beyond reach. Across cultures and ages, there are stories of truths concealed, of initiations limited to the few, of wisdom veiled in allegory, as though humanity itself was not meant to know its full origin until the appointed time. The silence around our beginnings may not be ignorance, but intention. The Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece are an example of this enigma. For nearly 2 millennia, initiates gathered in secret rites that promised not power, but knowledge so profound that participants swore never to reveal it. Accounts are vague, yet many describe visions of life, death, and rebirth, revelations that transformed their understanding of existence. Was this a theater of the psyche, or a survival of teachings older than Greece itself, carried forward in secrecy to preserve fragments of a story too dangerous to be public? If humans were engineered, perhaps such mysteries were remnants of the original instructions, concealed in ritual so that only those prepared would glimpse the truth. The Gnostics, too, spoke of hidden knowledge. Their texts, discovered at Nag Hammadi, describe archons who shaped humanity and veiled it from its divine origin. To the Orthodox, these writings were heresies, swiftly suppressed, their libraries burned, their voices silenced. Yet what they claimed resonates eerily with the idea of engineered humanity. That we are both divine and bound, shaped and limited, our true potential hidden behind layers of control. Could these teachings, long buried, be distorted memories of humanity's design, whispering that we are not only creations, but captives of our Maker's intention? In India, the Vedic tradition preserves vast cosmic cycles, yugas in which humanity rises to wisdom and falls again into darkness. Each cycle ends with renewal, as though knowledge itself ebbs and flows by design, allowed in one age, withheld in another. The Mayans told of suns destroyed and reborn, each age beginning anew. These cycles suggest that humanity is not only shaped, but regulated, its awareness rising and falling as if calibrated by an unseen hand. If we were engineered, perhaps forgetting was part of the design, ensuring that knowledge emerged only when it would not undo the experiment. Even in modern science, the theme of hiddenness persists. The human brain, though mapped, still defies complete understanding. Vast networks of neurons lie dormant, their functions unknown. Geneticists identify sections of DNA whose purpose remains mysterious, sequences that seem to wait for activation. Archaeology unearths sites whose significance cannot yet be grasped, leaving questions suspended like notes unresolved. The deeper one looks, the more one encounters what is concealed, what resists explanation, as though humanity itself is surrounded by walls of silence meant to protect or to limit. And yet, the guardians of conventional knowledge insist that hiddenness is not design, but limitation. They argue that mysteries endure because evidence erodes, because memory fails, because our science is still young. They warn against turning gaps into answers, against mistaking the unknown for the deliberate. But what if the recurrence of hiddenness across every field, myth, ritual, science, and history, is itself a sign? What if concealment is not accident, but architecture, part of the shaping of a species whose origins were never meant to be fully known? The climax of this paradox lies in humanity's own restless pursuit of what is veiled. Across millennia, seekers, prophets, philosophers, and scientists have tried to pierce the curtain. Some claim visions of otherworldly beings. Others decode symbols carved into stone or hidden in scriptures. Each pursuit risks exile, suppression, or ridicule. Yet the search continues, unrelenting. Could this hunger be itself a program, a drive encoded by the engineers to ensure that one day we would ask, remember, and perhaps discover? The persistence of our search suggests that the veil is not absolute, but permeable, that fragments slip through, enough to sustain the question, never enough to close it. And so the silence gathers into its final question. Why? If humanity was engineered, why cloak our origin in mystery? Was it protection, to shield us from knowledge we could not yet bear? Was it control, to bind us within limits set by our makers? Or was it mercy, allowing us to believe in chance and freedom, rather than face the weight of being creations in an experiment beyond comprehension? The myths, the monuments, the code, all point toward design, yet none reveal the intention. We stand at the edge of knowledge, surrounded by echoes, by fragments, by whispers of hands that once shaped us, and perhaps still watch from the dark. As the night folds into stillness, the thought remains, quiet yet inexhaustible. Perhaps we are meant to live in the tension between forgetting and remembering, between ignorance and revelation. Perhaps the truth is not lost, but waiting, sealed within us like a seed that only blooms in its season. Until then, the question lingers, unending, soft as breath against the veil. Are we the children of chance, or the engineered reflections of a mind that hides even as it creates?